The wagon wheels stopped turning when the snow reached above the axles. We had been pushing through the white expanse for hours, watching the blizzard erase our tracks behind us, when everything simply stopped. The horses stood still, their breath rising in thick clouds. The wind howled across the empty land. And that's when Samuel pointed ahead. Through the curtain of falling snow, barely visible against the white horizon, stood the dark shape of a cabin, abandoned, alone, waiting. If you're enjoying this journey into the past, please subscribe to hear more stories of survival and the human spirit. Your support helps keep these tales alive. My name is William, and I was there that frozen afternoon in the winter of 1847. I was the stranger among them, the city man who had joined this wagon train west with nothing but hope and foolish dreams. I didn't know then that this cabin, this storm, and these people would teach me everything about what it means to truly survive. Not just the cold, not just the hunger, but the loneliness that comes from being lost in a world you don't understand. The wind bit through my coat as I stood beside the wagon. I had been traveling with these pioneers for 3 months, but I still felt like an outsider looking in. They moved with purpose. They knew the land, and I was just learning to stop being afraid of the silence. What I didn't know then was that the next few months would change everything I believed about strength, about family, and about home. The snow continued to fall as we approached the cabin. Each step sank deep into the white powder, and I watched as Samuel, the leader of our group, raised his hand. We all stopped. He stood there for a long moment, reading something in the landscape that I couldn't see. His weathered face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "The cabin looks sound," he said finally. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the wind. "We'll shelter there until the storm passes." I had learned to trust Samuel's judgment. He was a man of few words, but every word carried weight. At 60 years old, he had led wagon trains across this territory for nearly 2 decades. The lines on his face told stories of survival that he never spoke aloud. Behind me, I heard the creak of the second wagon as it stopped. That's where Martha rode with her 2 children. She was the strongest woman I had ever met. Not in the loud, obvious way, but in the quiet way that moves mountains without fanfare. When her husband died of fever 2 weeks into the journey, she had simply tightened her jaw and kept moving forward. "William," her voice cut through my thoughts. "Help me with the children." I turned to see her already climbing down from the wagon, her skirts heavy with snow. Her daughter Emma, just 7 years old, peered out from beneath a wool blanket, her small face pale with cold. Her son, Thomas, at 12, was trying to look brave, but his hands were shaking. What none of us knew then was that this cabin would become more than shelter. It would become... But I'm getting ahead of myself. "Come on, Emma," I said softly, reaching up to help her down. She was light in my arms, and I could feel her trembling. "We'll have a fire soon. You'll be warm." She nodded against my shoulder but didn't speak. Emma hadn't spoken much since losing her father. I understood. Sometimes silence is the only language that makes sense. Samuel was already at the cabin door, testing it with his shoulder. Behind him stood Joseph, a young man of 20 who had become something like my guide in this strange new world. He had grown up on the frontier, and he moved through this landscape like it was an extension of his own body. Where I saw only white emptiness, he saw trails and signs and stories written in the snow. "Doors frozen shut," Samuel called back. "Joseph, bring the axe." Joseph was already moving, his long legs carrying him quickly through the deep snow. There was an ease to his movements that I envied. He caught my eye and grinned, that quick, warm smile that had first made me trust him. "City man looks cold," he teased, though his tone was kind. "City man is freezing," I admitted. The axe struck the doorframe once, twice, 3 times. Ice shattered. The door groaned and then swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. Samuel stepped inside first, and we heard his voice echo in the empty space. "It's dry. Stone fireplace intact. We can make this work." Those simple words felt like salvation. The next hour was a blur of movement. We brought the horses into a lean-to shelter attached to the cabin, barely standing, but better than leaving them exposed to the storm. We unloaded supplies. We cleared snow from the doorway. And slowly, painfully, we began to create warmth in that cold, empty space. But I remember the moment when everything changed. I was carrying an armful of supplies when I heard a voice I didn't recognize. Deep, weathered, speaking with an accent I couldn't place. I turned to see an old man emerging from the shadows at the back of the cabin. He had been there all along. We just hadn't seen him in the darkness. Samuel's hand went to his belt, where he kept a knife. But the old man raised his palms, showing he meant no harm. "I mean no trouble," the old man said. His English was careful, each word deliberate. "I shelter from storm, like you." There was a long silence. The wind howled outside. Emma pressed closer to her mother. Young Thomas stared with wide eyes. And then Samuel did something that I would remember for the rest of my life. He nodded once and said, "There's room for all of us." The old man's face broke into a smile that seemed to light up the dark cabin. "My name is Nico. Was, hunter, trapper, now just old man." "Samuel," our leader replied, "and this is our company." That night, as we sat around the fire that Joseph had coaxed to life, Nico told us he had been living in these mountains for 40 years. He was from somewhere in Europe. He never said exactly where, but he had come west as a young man and never left. His cabin, his real home, was 10 miles north. But the storm had caught him during a hunting trip, and he had found this abandoned shelter just as we had. "This cabin," he said, his eyes reflecting the firelight, "was built by a family. 20 years ago, maybe more. They stayed one winter, then left, never came back." "Why did they leave?" Emma asked, her small voice surprising all of us. It was the first time she had spoken in days. Nico looked at her with kind eyes. "Many reasons people leave, little one. Sometimes the land is too hard. Sometimes they miss home. Sometimes—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes they find they are not ready for what the wilderness asks of them." What he said next would become important later, though I didn't know it then. "But the cabin remembers," Nico continued. "These walls hold the warmth of every person who sheltered here. And now we add our warmth too." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind continued its endless howl. But inside, for the first time in weeks, I felt something approaching peace. Martha was already organizing our limited supplies, her practical mind calculating how long we could last if the storm continued. Samuel sat near the door, watching the snow pile higher against the window. Joseph was teaching young Thomas how to properly stack wood for the fire, and Emma had fallen asleep against her mother's side, her small face finally relaxed. "How long will the storm last?" I asked Nico. The old man tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. 3 days, maybe 4. The sky has a certain voice when the storm will be long. We have food for a week, Martha said quietly, if we're careful. The horses? Samuel asked. They'll be all right in the lean-to, Joseph answered, but we'll need to check on them regularly. Make sure they stay dry. I watched these people work together with a practiced ease that I had been observing for months but never quite understanding. They didn't need to discuss every detail. They didn't argue about who should do what. They simply moved, each person knowing their role, each task flowing into the next like water finding its course. And I was the stone in that stream. Still, uncertain, trying to figure out where I fit. But something was about to happen that would begin to change that. William. Samuel's voice pulled me from my thoughts. You know letters and numbers, don't you? I nodded. Back in Boston, I had been a clerk. I could read and write and calculate. It was one of the few skills I had brought west with me, a skill that seemed useless when faced with frozen rivers and endless prairie. Good, Samuel said. Tomorrow you'll teach Emma and Thomas. Give them something to do while we wait out the storm. I blinked, surprised. I'm not a teacher. You are now. Samuel's tone left no room for argument, but his eyes were kind. Children need purpose, especially during times like this. Martha looked at me, and I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Gratitude, trust, like she was placing something precious in my hands. I'd be honored, I said quietly. Nico chuckled from his place by the fire. Ah, the city man becomes a teacher. The wilderness changes everyone. This is good. This is very good. That night, I lay awake listening to the storm rage outside. The cabin groaned and creaked, but the walls held strong. Around me, I could hear the breathing of 7 people. Samuel, Martha, Emma, Thomas, Joseph, Nico, and myself. 7 strangers brought together by chance and necessity. I thought about the family who had built this cabin 20 years ago. I wondered where they had gone. I wondered if they had looked back as they left, or if they had simply turned their faces forward and kept moving. The wilderness changes everyone, Nico had said. I was starting to understand what he meant, but I had no idea how much I still had to learn. About the cold, about survival, about the strange and beautiful ways that people can become family when everything else is stripped away. The storm continued, and in the morning our real journey would begin. Because the storm wasn't just weather. It was a teacher. And this cabin, these people, this moment, they were all part of a lesson I desperately needed to learn. I just didn't know it yet. Outside, the snow fell harder. Inside, the fire burned warm. And somewhere between those 2 truths, I finally fell asleep. When I woke, I would discover something that would change everything. Morning arrived with a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The storm had paused, not ended, but resting. The kind of break in the weather that Samuel called the eye's edge. We had maybe an hour of calm before it would begin again. We need water, Samuel announced as we gathered around the dying embers of the night's fire. And we need to check the horses. I volunteered immediately, eager to prove useful. Joseph came with me and Nico followed despite his age, moving through the snow with a practiced ease that made me feel clumsy by comparison. The world outside was transformed. Snow had buried everything. The wagons, the trees, the trail we had followed. It was a landscape of pure white, broken only by the dark shape of the cabin behind us and the mountains rising in the distance like sleeping giants. Beautiful, isn't it? Joseph said, his breath rising in clouds. It was beautiful and terrifying. I had never felt so small. The horses were alive, thank God, huddled together in the lean-to. We cleared snow from around them and rationed out what little grain we had left. Nico watched me work, and I could feel his eyes measuring me. "You care for animals," he observed. "This is good. The wilderness respects those who respect life." "I had a dog once," I said, surprising myself with the confession. "Back in Boston, before I came west." "And where is this dog now?" "Dead. Fever took him the winter before I left." I paused, feeling the old grief surface. "I suppose that's partly why I left. Everything there reminded me of everything I'd lost." Nico nodded slowly. "Ah, you run from ghosts. Many people come west running from ghosts." He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "But ghosts follow. The wilderness doesn't let you run. It makes you stand still. Face yourself. Only then can you truly move forward." His words settled into me like stones dropping into deep water. We found a stream nearby, its surface frozen, but the water still flowing beneath. Joseph showed me how to break through the ice carefully, how to fill our containers without falling in, how to read the snow for hidden dangers. Everything here had rules I was still learning. When we returned to the cabin, the storm was gathering strength again. Dark clouds rolled across the sky like an approaching army. Inside, Martha had organized the space with military precision. Sleeping areas were defined. Supplies were cataloged. Emma and Thomas were sitting near the rebuilt fire, waiting for their lesson. "Ready, teacher?" Martha asked, and there was the smallest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. I had no books, no paper, no proper teaching materials. But I had a piece of charcoal from the fire and the smooth wall of the cabin. And I had 2 children who desperately needed something to think about besides the cold and their dead father. "Let's start with letters," I said, drawing an A on the wall. "This is the beginning of everything." Emma watched with intense concentration. Thomas pretended to be bored, but I could see him paying attention. And for the next hour, as the storm hammered against the walls, we lost ourselves in the simple magic of words. This would become our routine for the next 3 days. While the storm raged, we created our own small world inside those walls. Samuel and Joseph maintained the fire, ventured out periodically to check on the horses, and made plans for when we could travel again. Martha cooked meals that stretched our supplies like she was performing miracles with bread and dried meat. And Nico told stories. That second night, as we sat around the fire after a meager supper, the old man's voice filled the cabin with tales that seemed older than the mountains themselves. "In the old country," he began, "before I came to this land, my grandfather told me stories of the winter. He said winter was not an enemy. Winter was a test. The earth sleeps, yes, but beneath the snow, life waits, preparing, growing stronger. And those who understand winter, truly understand it, they learn the most important lesson." "What lesson?" Emma asked, her eyes wide in the firelight. "That survival is not about fighting. It is about acceptance, about working with the world, not against it." He looked around at each of us. The family who built this cabin, they fought the winter. They tried to force the land to be what they wanted, and so they failed. They left. "But we're not going to leave," Thomas said, his young voice defiant. "No," Samuel agreed quietly. "We're not." Nico smiled. "Because you understand. You bend like the willow in the wind. You adapt. This is wisdom. I thought about his words long after everyone else had fallen asleep. Was I adapting, or was I still fighting? Still trying to be the person I had been in Boston instead of becoming whoever I needed to be here? The question haunted me. On the third day, something happened that would test all of us. Joseph and I were outside, clearing snow from around the lean-to when we heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A low, rumbling growl that made every hair on my body stand up. "Don't move," Joseph whispered, his hand slowly reaching for the rifle he always carried. "Very slowly. Look to your left." I turned my head, my heart hammering, and saw them. 3 wolves standing at the edge of the tree line. Gray and massive, their yellow eyes fixed on us. Or, more accurately, fixed on the horses. "Back to the cabin," Joseph said, his voice steady despite the danger. "Slow. No running." We moved together, step by careful step through the deep snow. The wolves watched but didn't follow. Not yet. Inside the cabin, Samuel listened to our report with his characteristic calm. "They're hungry. Storm's driven the game deep into the mountains. They smell the horses." "What do we do?" Martha asked, pulling Emma and Thomas close. "We protect what's ours," Samuel said simply. "And we respect that they're just trying to survive, same as us." That night, Samuel and Joseph took turns keeping watch. Nico joined them, his old hunting rifle across his knees. I volunteered for a shift as well, though I had never fired a gun at anything living in my life. "You may not have to shoot," Nico told me as we sat together in the dark hours before dawn. "Often, presence is enough. The wolves, they are smart. They know when prey is too dangerous to take. And if presence isn't enough, then you do what you must, but you do it with respect. You thank the animal for its sacrifice. You waste nothing. This is the way." The wolves never attacked. We heard them howling in the darkness, circling, testing, but our vigil held them at bay. By morning, they had moved on, looking for easier prey. When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, we emerged to find a world transformed. The snow reached above my waist in places. Our wagons were buried. The trail we had been following was completely erased. "We can't stay here," Samuel said, surveying the landscape with experienced eyes. "Our supplies won't last another week, and more storms are coming. We need to reach Fort Bridger before the deep winter sets in." "How far?" Martha asked. "Maybe 80 miles. Maybe more. Hard to say with the snow." "We'll never make it with the wagons," Joseph observed. Samuel nodded slowly. "No, we won't." The decision was made. We would abandon the wagons, take only what we could carry, and make for the fort on foot. It was dangerous. It was desperate. But staying here meant certain death when the food ran out. "I know the way," Nico said quietly. "Through the mountains, shorter than the wagon trail, harder but shorter. I can guide you." Samuel studied the old man for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" Nico shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both sadness and acceptance. "I am old. This winter might be my last. Better to spend it helping others than dying alone in my cabin. Besides," he looked at Emma and Thomas, "children should not die in the snow. This I cannot allow." What happened next would stay with me forever. We spent the entire day preparing. We broke down what we couldn't carry and used it to improve the lean-to for the horses. We couldn't take them with us through the mountain passes, but we could leave them with enough shelter and food to survive until someone else came along. It broke Martha's heart to leave them, but she understood necessity. Each person was allowed one pack. We carried food, blankets, fire-starting materials, and the bare essentials for survival. Everything else, Martha's mother's dishes, my books, Joseph's extra clothes, all of it was left behind. We travel light, Samuel said. We travel fast. We stop only when we must. Nico leads. I follow. Everyone stays in line. No one strays. Understood? We all nodded. That night, our last in the cabin, the mood was somber. We knew what we were about to attempt. We knew the risks. But there was something else too. A strange kind of determination. We had survived the storm together. We had faced the wolves together. We were becoming something more than strangers traveling the same path. We were becoming a tribe. Nico told one more story that night. It was about a group of travelers who got lost in the mountains during winter. They were starving, freezing, dying, but they found each other, and in finding each other, they found the strength to survive. The wilderness is hard, Nico said, his old voice soft in the firelight. But it is also honest. It strips away everything false, everything unnecessary. And what remains, that is truth. That is what matters. He looked at each of us in turn. You are strong. Together you are stronger. Remember this when the cold makes you want to give up. Remember that you are not alone. Emma was crying quietly, and I didn't think it was just about the story. Will we make it? She asked, her small voice breaking the silence that followed. Samuel answered before anyone else could. Yes, he said with absolute certainty. We will make it, because we have each other. And that's enough. I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. But as I lay awake that night, listening to the wind beginning to rise again outside, I couldn't shake the fear that we were about to attempt something impossible. The next morning arrived gray and cold. We made final preparations in silence, each person focused on their task. I helped Emma secure her small pack, making sure it wouldn't be too heavy for her to carry. Thomas tried to look brave, but I could see his hands shaking as he checked and rechecked his supplies. You'll do fine, I told him quietly. Just watch Joseph. Do what he does. You're stronger than you think. He nodded, not trusting his voice. By mid-morning, we were ready. Nico stood at the front of our small line, his weathered face turned toward the mountains. Samuel was second, with Joseph behind him. Then came Martha and Emma and Thomas. I brought up the rear, which meant I was responsible for making sure no one fell behind. Before we left, Samuel did something I'll never forget. He walked to the cabin wall where I had drawn letters for the children and added one more mark. 7 vertical lines representing the 7 of us. So the next travelers know we were here, he explained, and that we survived together. Then we turned our backs on the cabin and began walking into the unknown. The first day was brutal. The snow was deep and we had no trail to follow. Nico led us through forests and across frozen streams, choosing paths that only he could see. My legs burned. My lungs ached from the cold air. But every time I thought about stopping, I would see Emma struggling ahead of me, her small form barely visible against the white landscape. And I would find the strength to take another step. We made camp that night in the shelter of an enormous fallen tree. Joseph and Samuel built a fire while the rest of us gathered what wood we could find nearby. The meal was simple, dried meat and hard bread, but it tasted like the finest feast. How far did we come? Martha asked Nico. Maybe 8 miles, maybe 10. The old man studied the stars visible through breaks in the clouds. We are making good time, but tomorrow will be harder. We climb. No one had the energy to ask questions. We simply ate our meager meal and huddled close to the fire, trying to preserve what warmth we could. That night, I took the first watch with Samuel. We sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the forest around us, the crack of freezing wood, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant call of an owl. "You've done well, William," Samuel said suddenly. "Better than I expected." I was surprised by the compliment. "I'm just trying not to slow everyone down." "You're doing more than that." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "You've been good with the children. Good for them. They need someone who can help them hold on to the world they came from while they learn to live in this new one. I don't know how to teach that. I barely understand it myself. None of us do. We're all just figuring it out as we go." He looked at me then, and in the firelight I could see the weight of responsibility he carried. "The truth is, William, survival isn't about knowing everything. It's about being willing to learn. And you've shown that willingness. That's rare." His words meant more to me than he could know. The next several days blurred together into a pattern of walking, camping, sleeping, and walking again. The mountains rose around us, massive and indifferent to our struggle. The cold deepened. The sky threatened more snow but held off, as if the world itself was waiting to see if we would make it. Nico proved to be an exceptional guide. He knew these mountains like I knew the streets of Boston. He found water when we were parched, shelter when we were exhausted, and game trails that made our passage slightly easier. But more than that, he knew how to keep our spirits up. Every night he told another story. Some were about his younger days as a trapper. Others were old tales from his homeland. And slowly, through these stories, I began to understand something important. The stories weren't just entertainment. They were a kind of map. Not for the land, but for how to survive in it. They taught us about patience, about observation, about the importance of helping each other. They were lessons disguised as tales, and we absorbed them without even realizing it. On the 6th day, something happened that brought all of Nico's teachings into sharp focus. We were crossing a frozen stream when Thomas fell through the ice. One moment he was there, stepping carefully where Joseph had just stepped successfully. The next moment, the ice cracked, and he dropped into the freezing water with a cry of shock and terror. Everything happened so fast, and yet I remember it with crystal clarity. Martha screamed. Samuel lunged forward. Joseph threw himself flat on the ice and reached for Thomas's flailing hands. And I don't even remember thinking. I just moved. I grabbed Joseph's legs to anchor him. Martha grabbed mine. Samuel was already pulling rope from his pack. Emma was crying, but following Samuel's shouted instructions to stay back, stay away from the weak ice. Thomas's face was white with shock, his lips already turning blue. The current was pulling at him, trying to drag him under the ice. But Joseph had him. Joseph held on with a grip like iron, talking calmly, soothingly, even as his own arms shook with effort. "I've got you, Thomas. I've got you. You're okay. We're not letting go. Do you hear me? We're not letting go." Samuel tied the rope around Joseph's waist, then around Thomas. Together we pulled, slowly, carefully. The ice cracked and groaned but held, and inch by inch we dragged Thomas out of that killing water. The moment he was clear, Martha had him wrapped in blankets. Nico was already building a fire with practiced speed. We stripped Thomas's wet clothes and wrapped him in every warm thing we had. His teeth chattered so hard I thought they might break. His skin was like ice. But he was alive. We stayed there for hours, keeping the fire blazing, rotating the blankets so they stayed warm, doing everything we could to chase the cold from Thomas's body. No one talked about moving on. No one suggested we needed to keep going. We had all understood without words that this was where we would stay for as long as it took. It was Nico who finally broke the silence. "This," he said quietly, "is what I mean when I say we survive together. The ice does not care about you alone. The cold does not respect individual strength. But together we can pull each other from death itself." Martha was holding Thomas close, rocking him slightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you. Thank you." Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder. Family takes care of family, and I realized that's what we had become. Not strangers, not just traveling companions, family. That night, as we camped in the shelter of some rocks, I found myself sitting next to Emma. She was quiet, staring into the fire, and I recognized the look on her face. It was the same expression she had worn after her father died, the look of someone trying to process something too big to understand. "Your brother is strong," I told her softly. "He'll be all right." "I thought he was going to die," she whispered, "like Papa." "I know, but he didn't. He's here, and he's going to be fine." She was silent for a moment, then asked, "Are you scared, William?" The question caught me off guard. My instinct was to lie, to be reassuring. But something about her honest eyes made me tell the truth instead. "Yes," I admitted. "I'm scared often. I'm scared of the cold and the mountains and making mistakes. But being scared doesn't mean we can't keep going. Fear just means we're paying attention to the danger. And that's actually a good thing." "Papa wasn't scared of anything," Emma said, and there was something in her voice. Not quite accusation, but close to it. "Your father was a brave man," I agreed carefully. "But I think even brave people feel fear. They just don't let it stop them. And that's what we're doing now. We're scared, but we're not stopping." She thought about this, then nodded slowly. "I don't want to be scared anymore." "Then don't be scared alone. Be scared with all of us. That makes it smaller somehow." She looked up at me, and for the first time since her father's death, she smiled. It was a small smile, fragile as new ice. But it was real. That moment felt like a victory somehow. Not over the wilderness, but over the isolation that the wilderness can create if you let it. The next morning, Thomas was weak but alive. He couldn't carry his pack, so we distributed his supplies among the rest of us. He walked between Joseph and his mother, supported when he stumbled, encouraged when he flagged. "Just to that tree," Joseph would say. "Can you make it to that tree?" And Thomas would nod and keep going. "Good. Now just to that rock. You can do it." Step by step, tree by tree, rock by rock. That's how we moved through those mountains, breaking impossible distances into possible increments. Nico led us higher into the mountains, following paths that seemed to exist only in his mind. The air grew thinner. The cold grew sharper. But we kept moving. On the 8th day, we crested a ridge and saw it. Fort Bridger in the valley below. Smoke rising from chimneys. Walls standing strong against the wilderness. Civilization. Salvation. Emma saw it first, and let out a cry of joy that echoed across the mountains. Thomas stood straighter, finding new strength in hope. Martha's face crumpled with relief, and she had to turn away to compose herself. "We made it," Joseph said, his voice full of wonder. "We actually made it." But Nico was looking at the sky, and his expression was troubled. "What is it?" Samuel asked, following the old man's gaze. "Another storm coming. Big one. We need to move quickly if we want to reach the fort before it hits." We looked up and saw what Nico saw, a wall of dark clouds building in the west, moving toward us with frightening speed. "How long?" Samuel asked. "Maybe 4 hours. Maybe less." The fort was at least 3 hours away, and that was if we moved fast and nothing went wrong. With Thomas weak from his ordeal, with all of us exhausted from days of hard travel, it was going to be close. "Then we'd better get moving," Samuel said grimly. We descended from the ridge as quickly as we dared. The path was steep and treacherous, and more than once someone slipped in the snow. But each time there was a hand to catch them. Each time we helped each other up and kept going. The clouds moved faster than we did. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of snow. The temperature dropped noticeably. The storm was racing us, and we were losing. We were still 2 miles from the fort when the snow began to fall. At first, it was just light flurries, but within minutes, it became a white curtain that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The wind howled. The temperature plummeted, and suddenly the fort that had seemed so close might as well have been on the other side of the world. "We have to keep moving," Samuel shouted over the wind. "Stay together. Follow Nico." But following anyone in that blizzard was nearly impossible. We held on to each other, forming a chain with Emma in the middle where she was most protected. Nico led with Samuel right behind him, using the old man's coat to stay oriented. Joseph and I brought up the rear, making sure no one fell behind. The world became nothing but white chaos and biting cold. I couldn't feel my feet. My hands were numb. Ice formed on my eyelashes, making it hard to see. But I kept moving because stopping meant death. I don't know how long we walked through that storm. It felt like hours, but might have been only minutes. Time had no meaning in that white hell. There was only one step, and then another and another, driven by pure, stubborn will to survive. And then, through the snow, we saw lights, the fort. We had reached the fort. Men rushed out to help us, shouting in surprise at finding travelers in such weather. Strong hands grabbed our arms, pulling us through the gate, into the compound, out of the killing storm. We stumbled into a warm building, a barracks of some kind, and collapsed on the floor, shaking uncontrollably as our frozen bodies began to thaw. Someone brought blankets. Someone else brought hot broth. Voices swirled around us, asking questions, exclaiming over our condition. But I barely heard them. I could only stare at the faces around me. Samuel, Martha, Emma, Thomas, Joseph, Nico, and feel profound gratitude that we were all still alive. We had made it. Against all odds, against the winter itself, we had made it. But our journey wasn't quite over yet. The fort's commander, a gruff man named Captain Reynolds, listened to our story with growing amazement. We sat in his quarters, drinking hot tea and slowly returning to ourselves after our ordeal. "You crossed Nico's Pass in this weather?" he asked, shaking his head. That's remarkable. Most people don't even attempt it in summer." "We had no choice," Samuel said simply. "And we had Nico." The old man waved away the praise, but I could see he was pleased. "The mountains are my home. I simply showed them the way home." Captain Reynolds studied each of us in turn. "You'll need to stay here for the winter. The next storm is already building, and there won't be another break until spring. We have room, and we can use the extra hands around the fort. Can you work?" "We can work," Martha said firmly, and so began our new phase of survival. Not fighting through blizzards or crossing frozen streams, but finding our place in a small community on the edge of civilization. The fort was home to perhaps 40 people during the winter months. Soldiers, traders, a few families who had decided to winter there rather than push on to their destinations. It was crowded and sometimes tense, but it was warm and safe. Those first few days were a blur of rest and recovery. Thomas slowly regained his strength, though he developed a cough that worried everyone. Emma began to come out of her shell, making friends with other children at the fort. Martha found work in the kitchens, her practical skills immediately valued. Joseph joined the hunting parties that ventured out during breaks in the weather. Samuel helped maintain the fort's defenses, and I became the fort's informal teacher. It started with Emma and Thomas, continuing the lessons we had begun in the cabin. But other children heard about it and asked to join. Then some of the adults, wanting to learn to read or improve their writing. Within a week, I had a classroom of sorts in a corner of the barracks. Teaching gave me purpose. More than that, it gave me identity. I wasn't just William the city man anymore. I was William the teacher. It was a small thing, but it felt like the beginning of belonging. Nico stayed at the fort with us, though he claimed he would return to his cabin come spring. He became something like the fort's grandfather, telling his stories on long winter nights, sharing his knowledge of the mountains with anyone who would listen, and keeping a gentle but watchful eye on Emma and Thomas. "They are healing," he told me one evening, as we watched Emma laugh at something another child had said. "The wilderness broke them open, yes, but now they can heal properly. Sometimes we must break before we can become stronger." "Is that what happened to you?" I asked. "When you came west?" He smiled, his weathered face crinkling. "Yes, I was broken many times, by the cold, by the loneliness, by the hard lessons of survival. But each breaking taught me something, and eventually I was not the man I had been. I was someone new, someone better, I think. Do you ever regret coming here?" "Regret?" He considered the word carefully. "No. I miss the old country sometimes. I miss the people I knew. But regret? No. This land has been hard but honest with me. It has never lied about what it is. And it has taught me to be honest, too. That is a gift." As winter deepened, our little group from the cabin became a recognized family within the fort. It wasn't official or legal, but it didn't need to be. Samuel and Martha took on the roles of parents to all of us. Nico was the grandfather. Joseph and I were the older brothers. Emma and Thomas were the children we all protected. We ate meals together. We worked together. We laughed together. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, we all understood that when spring came and the passes opened, we would continue traveling together. Whatever destinations we had originally been seeking had become less important than staying with this found family. One night, about 2 months into our stay at the fort, Samuel gathered us all together in a quiet corner. "I want to say something," he began, his usually steady voice thick with emotion. "When I agreed to lead that wagon train west, I thought I was just guiding strangers to their destinations. I've done it dozens of times before. It was a job, nothing more." He paused, looking at each of us. But somewhere along the way, maybe in that cabin, maybe on the mountain pass, maybe just now in this fort, you all stopped being strangers. You became my people, my family. Martha was crying quietly. Emma had buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "I don't know what the future holds," Samuel continued. "Don't know where we'll end up when spring comes. But I know this. Wherever we go together, if that's agreeable to everyone." "Agreeable?" Joseph laughed, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Samuel, I couldn't leave you all if I tried. You're stuck with me." "And us," Martha said firmly, speaking for herself and her children. "I am too old for more adventures," Nico said with a grin. "But I think maybe one more year of traveling with family would be good for the soul." They all looked at me. "I came west looking for a new beginning," I said slowly, working through the thoughts that had been forming for weeks. I thought that meant a new place, a new job, a new set of circumstances. But what I needed was a new self, and you all helped me find that. So, yes, wherever we go together." Samuel nodded, satisfied. "Then it's settled. Come spring, we head to California. I know a valley there. Good land, gentle climate. We can build something. Not just for us, but for others who come after. A place where people can start over. Does that sound all right?" It sounded more than all right. It sounded like a dream I hadn't known I was allowed to have. The rest of that winter passed in a warm haze of community and purpose. I taught my classes. Emma and Thomas thrived. Joseph became one of the fort's most reliable hunters. Martha's cooking became legendary. Samuel helped settle disputes and organize work parties. And Nico just kept being Nico, wise and warm and full of stories. But as winter loosened its grip and the first signs of spring appeared, Thomas's cough got worse. It started as nothing, just a lingering remnant of his plunge into the frozen stream, or so we all thought. But it didn't get better. It got worse. He developed a fever. He lost weight. He slept more and more. The fort's doctor, an old army surgeon named Patterson, examined him with growing concern. "His lungs are damaged," Patterson told Martha and Samuel privately, though I was there too. The cold water, the hard to travel afterward, it was too much. His body couldn't fully recover. "What can we do?" Martha asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "Keep him warm, keep him fed, keep him resting, and pray." For the first time since we'd reached the fort, I saw real fear in Samuel's eyes, and in Martha's, and in all of us. Thomas had become more than Martha's son. He had become our collective child, the bright future we were all working toward. The thought of losing him was unbearable. We took turns sitting with him, reading to him, telling him stories. Emma barely left his side, her small hand always holding his. Joseph carved him a whistle from a piece of wood. Nico taught him songs from the old country in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. And I told him about California, about the valley we would build in, about the house he would have, about the horse he would ride, about the future that was waiting for him if he would just hold on. The days dragged by. Thomas would seem better one day, worse the next. The fever would break, then return. His cough would ease, then come back harder. We all held our breath, suspended between hope and despair. And then, slowly, impossibly, he began to improve. The fever stayed away longer. The cough became less frequent. Color returned to his cheeks. He started eating again, started smiling again. Dr. Patterson couldn't explain it. He shouldn't have recovered, he said, shaking his head. By all medical logic, his lungs were too damaged. He should have just gotten weaker until... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. But Nico understood. Love is stronger than medicine sometimes, the old man said simply. The boy knew he was not alone, knew he was needed, knew he was loved. So he chose to live. Whether it was love or medicine or pure luck, Thomas recovered. By the time the spring melt began in earnest, he was back on his feet, thin and weak but undeniably alive. The fort erupted in quiet celebration. It felt like a sign, a promise that if we had made it through this, we could make it through anything. As the passes opened and travelers began arriving from the east, talk turned to departure. Samuel and Captain Reynolds studied maps and discussed routes. Martha prepared supplies. Joseph checked our equipment. Emma and Thomas talked endlessly about California, building it up in their minds into a paradise. And I sat with Nico one last time, watching the snow melt from the mountains. You will be good in California, Nico told me. You will teach. You will help build. You will be happy. You talk like you're not coming, I observed. He smiled that knowing smile of his. I am old, William. The journey from here to California, it is long. Too long for these bones, I think. Nico. No, no. Do not be sad. This is right. This is good. He placed a hand over his heart. I came west alone many years ago. I lived alone for most of my life. But these months with you, with all of you, they have been a gift. You reminded me what it means to be part of family. That is enough. That is more than enough. Come with us anyway, I urged. We'll take care of you. You're part of the family too. I know, and that is beautiful. But my time is for staying, not going. My mountains need me, and perhaps... His eyes grew distant. Perhaps there will be others who need guidance, others lost in the snow. I can wait here. Help when help is needed. I understood then. Nico wasn't just choosing to stay. He was choosing to be the guide for others that he had been for us, to pay forward the gift he had given us. You saved our lives, I said quietly. No, we saved each other. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. He looked at me seriously. Remember this in California. Remember that survival is not about being strong alone. It is about being strong together. Teach this. Pass it on. I will. Good. Then my work here is complete. The morning we left, the entire fort turned out to see us off. We had a wagon again, purchased from a trader who had wintered at the fort, and our supplies were fresh. The weather was clear. The trail was open. Nico stood at the gate, his hand raised in farewell. Emma was crying, and even Thomas had tears in his eyes. We had said our goodbyes privately earlier, but this public farewell felt important somehow. It marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Go with grace, Nico called out. Go with strength. Go with love. And remember, the wilderness is not your enemy. It is your teacher. Learn well. Samuel called back. We'll remember, and we'll tell others. Your lessons will live on. Nico smiled, satisfied. Then he turned and walked back into the fort, and we turned and walked toward California. The journey west took 3 months. We traveled with a larger group now, several families who had wintered at the fort and were continuing their migration. Safety in numbers. But our small family stayed close, our bonds unbreakable. The landscape changed as we traveled. Mountains gave way to valleys. Snow gave way to flowers. The harsh white winter transformed into a green spring, and then a golden summer. And I changed too. I became stronger physically. The constant travel building muscles I never knew I had. But more than that, I became stronger inside. The uncertain city man who had started this journey was gone. In his place was someone who knew how to survive, how to help, how to teach, how to belong. We reached California in late summer, finding Samuel's Valley exactly where he remembered it. It was beautiful, a wide expanse of gentle hills and clear streams, protected by mountains on one side and open to the sun on the other. "This is it," Samuel said, his voice full of satisfaction. "This is home." We built our houses slowly, carefully, using what the land gave us. Samuel and Joseph did most of the heavy construction. Martha planned the layouts. Emma and Thomas helped where they could. And I built a schoolhouse. It was small at first, just one room with rough benches and a blackboard made from a painted piece of wood. But it was mine. It was purpose made solid. Other families joined us over the next year. Word spread about our valley, about the community we were building. They came from the east, tired and searching, and we welcomed them the way we had been welcomed. Each new family added something to our community: a blacksmith, a carpenter, a doctor, a preacher. Slowly, our collection of houses became a village, and I taught them all, children mostly, but adults too, reading and writing and arithmetic, but also the lessons I had learned on that journey, about cooperation, about respecting the land, about being strong together. I never forgot Nico's words. I passed them on to everyone who would listen. And slowly, those lessons became part of the culture of our little valley. Years passed. The village grew. Emma grew up to become a teacher herself, working alongside me in the school we expanded together. Thomas recovered fully and became a skilled carpenter, building houses for new families. Joseph married a woman from one of the later wagon trains. Martha became the heart of the community, the person everyone turned to in times of trouble. And Samuel. Samuel became the leader everyone needed, firm but kind, wise but humble. We prospered. Not because we were lucky, though we had our share of luck, but because we remembered. We remembered what it meant to survive together. We remembered the cabin in the snow. We remembered Nico's lessons. We remembered that we were stronger as a family than we ever could be alone. I'm an old man now, sitting on the porch of the schoolhouse I built 50 years ago. My hair is white. My hands shake slightly as I write. But my mind is clear, and my memories are sharp. The valley has grown into a proper town. There are hundreds of people here now, living lives that would have been impossible without that journey through the winter. The schoolhouse has been rebuilt twice, each time larger. There are 3 teachers now, all trained by Emma and me. Emma is gray herself, teaching the grandchildren of people she taught as a young woman. Thomas runs the largest carpentry business in 3 counties. Joseph's children and grandchildren are scattered across California, all of them carrying forward the lessons we learned together. Martha died 5 years ago, peacefully in her sleep. We buried her on the hill overlooking the valley with a stone that reads, "She was mother to many." Samuel followed her 2 years later. His stone says simply, "He led well." Sometimes I think about how it all began. That storm, that cabin, that desperate journey through the mountains, how close we came to death, how easily we could have failed. But we didn't fail, because we had each other. I think about Nico often. We never saw him again after leaving Fort Bridger, though we heard stories over the years. Stories of an old man who guided lost travelers through the mountains, who told stories by campfires, who taught others how to survive. He died eventually, of course. We all do. But his lessons lived on. Through us, through the people we taught, through the culture we built in this valley. That's what survival really means, I've come to understand. Not just staying alive, but passing on what you've learned. Building something that lasts beyond your own life. Creating connections that endure. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something important, please subscribe. These tales of survival and the human spirit need to be remembered. They need to be shared, and your support helps keep them alive for the next generation. Young Emma, my Emma's granddaughter, named for her grandmother, comes to visit me most afternoons. She's learning to be a teacher herself, and she asks me questions about the old days. "Tell me about the cabin again," she asked yesterday. "The one in the snow." So I told her. I told her about the storm and the wolves and the frozen stream. I told her about Thomas falling through the ice and the desperate journey to the fort. I told her about Nico and his wisdom and his stories. But most of all, I told her about the moment when 7 strangers became a family. Because that's the heart of the story. That's what matters most. We survived because we had each other, I told her. Remember that, Emma. When things get hard, and they will get hard, remember that no one survives alone. We need each other. We've always needed each other. She nodded, her young face serious. She understands. All our young people understand. We've taught them well. The sun is setting now, painting the valley gold and purple. From where I sit, I can see the houses we built, the fields we planted, the school we expanded. I can see the town that grew from that desperate winter journey. And I can see the people, hundreds of them, all connected, all part of the same story. The wind picks up, cool but not cold. Nothing like the killing wind of that winter so long ago. This wind carries the scent of growing things, of life continuing. I close my eyes and I can almost hear Nico's voice, carried on that wind. The wilderness strips away everything false, everything unnecessary, and what remains, that is truth. That is what matters. We found that truth in a cabin in the snow. 7 strangers brought together by chance and desperation. And in finding each other, we found everything we needed to survive. Not just the winter, but life itself. This is my story. This is our story. And now it's yours too. Remember it. Share it. Pass it on. Because the lessons of that winter, about survival, about family, about the strength we find in each other, those lessons are eternal. They saved us once. And perhaps, if we teach them well, they'll save someone else too. The snow falls somewhere tonight. The cold presses in. And somewhere, people are struggling to survive. But they won't be alone. Because we've left markers along the way. Stories and lessons and the knowledge that survival is a shared journey. 7 lines on a cabin wall. A school in a California valley. And a story told and retold. Generation after generation. We survived. We built. We remembered. And that, in the end, is all that matters. The wind whispers across the valley. The sun sets, and I smile. grateful for every moment of the journey that brought me here. From the snow to this warm evening, from stranger to family, from lost to found. This is how we survive. Together. Always together. If these stories of survival and the enduring human spirit resonate with you, please subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these important tales of courage, connection, and what it truly means to be human in the face of adversity. Thank you for joining William on his journey. May we all find our own cabin in the snow, and may we all discover our own family along the way.